And all of this should make you understand. It didn't matter whether you were maybe crispier than the other Muslim in Masjid al-Aqsa. You rose your hands, you didn't raise your hands. 100,000 cleared. And in some historical accounts, they even ate some of the bodies. These are the type of people that we're dealing with because it's their civilization. Further to this, Al-Hasani Sabah, Ibn al-Sabah in 494AH and his Batiniya group, known as the Hashishiyun, made inroads into Iraq and mountainous areas around there and Sham. More tribulations came in 497AH when the crusading Franks took Jubail near Beirut by truce. They then took Akka by force of arms and drove out the governor of the area and put him to flight in his own boats. The Franks next moved to Harran, but were met by Suqman and an army of 10,000. Let me say, Suqman was not one of the ulama, one of the governors. He was a concerned Muslim. Just one brother. Suqman and 10,000 troops. Just one brother. He didn't wait. He didn't say, I better write a letter. He took it upon himself. He sees there's a job that needs to be done, and he did it. How many of us can see cracks, can see things that are there? We complain. We argue, but nothing gets done. If you see a hole in the wall and you've got cement, seal it up. Suqman rose 10,000 just by himself. He's not even one of the ulama. Went out with the troops that he raised in 10,000. They were overwhelmed by the Franks and they retreated. The Crusaders pursued them until they reached An-Nasr, where there were Muslims in larger numbers waiting for them. They were then defeated by the Muslims in a massive victory. All right? So never ever think that you can't make it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prizes and holds all people of the Muslims in high regard, from their scholar to their layman. He holds them in high regard. The Franks took the fortress of Famiya in 499AH. Torablus was also taken, and the Muslims were made to leave from that place and make room for the Franks to come live there. Right. So the Muslims were made to leave from that place to make room for the Franks to come and live there. This is called colonization. It's called colonization. Now we know where Queen Victoria and the others got it from. It's called colonization. The Frankish king Sinjil grew old and died at that time and was buried in Jerusalem. Now we want to look at some of the deaths that occurred around this time. Ahmed ibn Abdul Baqi al-Mawsili died in 459AH at 77 years of age. He was one of the most important students of Imam Abu Ya'la and codifier of most of Imam Abu Ya'la's books. Very important scholar. Abu Bakr al-Maghribi, Abu Qasim al-Hannai, Abu Muslim al-Asbahani, who was a Mu'tazili preacher and missionary. Al-Qadi Abu Ali al-Marwazi, who was the chief scholar of the Shafi'is. Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Attab al-Judami, who was the chief Qadi of Qurtuba in Andalus. They all died in 462AH. You next have Karima bint Ahmed al-Marwaziyya, who died in 463AH. She never married because she was so busy studying the knowledge. Abu Sa'id al-Sukkari, Abu Ja'far al-Muslima, Abu al-Hasan al-Amidi, one of the students of Abu Ya'la the elder. They all died in 465AH. In 469AH, there was Abu Umar al-Qurtubi, the chief mufti of Andalus. Khadija al-Shahjaniyya, one of the chief judges of Baghdad. Aisha al-Asbahaniyya, another high-ranking saint. In 461AH, there was Abu al-Qasim al-Marwazi, Abu Zakariya al-Bukhari, Abu al-Hussein al-Masri, Abu al-Hussein al-Farisi. At the time of 463AH, those who died include Abu Bakr al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, Abu Umar ibn Abdulbar al-Qurtubi. Now these two figures are very important. These two figures, Abu Bakr al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, he is called Hafidh al-Gharb, the hadith memorizer of the West. Major Shafi'i scholar. He wrote a number of classics. Perhaps his most noble text, Kitab al-Faqih wal-Mutafaqih, the book on the faqih and the one who studies fiqh. If someone reads that book with a teacher and truly understands it, that person can be said to be mutafaqih. You have studied fiqh. You've studied fiqh when you've read that book. It's a remarkable book. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi was one of the great scholars of Baghdad. He wrote a voluminous history book. He also had a penchant for remembering historical facts and would often write his documentation of history from memory, and he was extremely accurate. The other alim we mentioned is Ibn Abdulbar Al-Qurtubi, the great Maliki scholar. He is called Hafidh al-Sharq, the Hafidh of the East. These two great ulama, Ibn Abdulbar the Maliki, Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi the Shafi'i, they died in the same year and the same month. That's how close Allah made them in their love for knowledge and their attention to detail. Ibn Abdulbar at the beginning of his age was a Zahiri in his madhab and his creed. He dumped that after being convinced of Imam Malik. And he wrote a book called At-Tamheed in fiqh. It's a thick 1-volume work in fiqh. Remarkable book, Maliki fiqh. Ibn Abdulbar in usul al-fiqh and in history. He's another historian from Andalus. Amazing historian. And his name, whenever someone wants to prove ijma', there are certain names that you quote that prove that something was known by the ulama to be ijma'. Ibn Abdulbar is one of them. Or when a hadith, there's been consensus made on what a certain hadith means by the ulama in usul al-fiqh. Certain scholars you quote, Ibn Abdulbar is one of them. Yusuf ibn Abdulbar al-Qadi, rahimahullah. One of the greatest scholars that Qurtuba ever produced. He goes up there with Imam Abu Hamid Al-Qurtubi, the writer of Jami' al-Ahkam al-Qur'an. Imam Abu Muhammad Al-Qurtubi is so great, people generally know him as Imam Al-Qurtubi. When you mention, do you have Imam Qurtubi's tafsir? They know who he is straight away. Whereas other people have the title Qurtubi, and you have to ask and go into further detail. If you just say, do you have Imam Al-Qurtubi's tafsir, the Jami'? People straight away know. But Ibn Abdulbar was unique because he combined fiqh, he combined tafsir, and he combined the sciences of medicine. So sometimes in his books, he would refer to medicine, or he would say the wisdom in this point can also be connected to this medical issue. And so he would sometimes combine medicine with these things. The scholars back then are not like professionals today that we find. This person's a doctor. That's all he knows is medicine. If his car breaks down, he can't change his tire, he tries to jack it up, it falls on him. He doesn't know anything about anything else. He can't cook rice, he can't cook beans. He doesn't even know how to take care of his children, but he's a good doctor. It's not like that. In the past, you had ulama, he was a doctor, he was an astronomer, he was a mathematician, he was a scientist, he was a historian, he was an archaeologist, he was an ethnologist. He was all of these things. They combined them. They did not separate the powers. So now you find, oh yeah, he's good at math, but he's not so good at science. You should be good at both of them. You should be learning them simultaneously. But this is what's happened. So the secular institutions have separated it. And this is why there's the problems that there are. Now further to this, there's another alim who died around the same time in 465 AH. His name is Abu Qasim Abdul Karim Al-Hawazin Al-Naysaburi Al-Qushayri. He died in 465 AH. Great Shafi'i and Ash'ari. One of the core components of understanding Ihsan and Tasawwuf is knowing about Imam Abu Qasim Al-Qushayri. His way, again, the same thing as Junaid. As-sabru was-samaha. Patience and sobriety. These are people that denounced practices that were blameworthy, where people claimed that Subhani, glory be to me, and they said, I'm saying this while I'm in a state of intoxication, or there's nothing under this jalabiyah but Allah. Imams like Abu Qasim Al-Qushayri, although they would say there are some people who say this and they are overtaken, but many of them were criminals and they were charlatans. Or people would say, some of them would say, if you give me this amount, I can see that your name in the qadr is changed, in which you'll receive good and no longer bad. I can see that your sustenance changes. I want to get married. I'll change that for you. Recognize it because it's here today. How many of us now under a new name, under rather the Sufi Sheikh, now he's the Pir Sahib. Or he's just the Sheikh. S-H-A-Y-K-H. The Sheikh. And that Sheikh, you can't leave the city without his permission. Or you want to get married and he doesn't approve of your wife. Or he meets your wife and says you have to divorce her. All these other things because of the Sheikh. And he is the replacement of the counterfeit Sufi Sheikh. And it's these people that you mirror image against Al-Junayd al-Baghdadi, Imam al-Qushayri, and all these other ulama. Also in 467 AH, Abu Bakr al-Khayyat, the famous Qari of Iraq and scholar of many disciplines, breathed his last. He was the first one to systemize the rules of tajweed into categories and to discuss them at length in a written work. So the sciences of tajweed existed. They were there. Scholars taught them. But Abu Bakr al-Khayyat, what he did is he started to use words like qalqala, right? The echoing of the word at the end. Or the halqiyya. He began to use expressions like this. Nun sakin or ghunna. He popularized these terms. And because of that, this Imam Abu Bakr al-Khayyat, his book, which is available but it's very hard to get a hold of, is the first one on the topic. Even the writing, you can tell, if they show you a photostat copy of it at the first page, even the writing, you can tell it was revolutionary what he was doing. The first one to write it down. And he was a remarkable figure. Remarkable figure. All right. He died in 467. In 470 AH, those deceased would be Sharif Abu Ja'far, Imam Abu Ali al-Banna, who died in 471 AH, author of some 500 books. Abu Qasim ibn Mandah died in 474 AH. And also there was Abu Walid al-Baji of Andalus, who died in the same time. Abu Walid al-Baji is the same one that demolished Ibn Hazm on the island of Majorca when Ibn Hazm had said there is no fiqh, there are no madhabs. And the people said, we have Imam Abu Walid al-Baji. He will divorce you of this false notion. And Ibn Hazm, who believed that no one could stop him in debate because he had a sharp tongue, and sometimes he would use foul language against his opponents. And Abu Walid al-Baji in debate systematically demolished him. To the point to where at the end of the debate, Ibn Hazm said, if the Malikis only had Abu Walid al-Baji, it would have been sufficient for them. To tell you about Abu Walid al-Baji would take me a 2-hour lecture to tell you about his greatness in terms of usul al-fiqh. He was one of the greatest Maliki scholars of Andalus. He was an usuli par excellence, a scholar of the disciplines. When his name is mentioned, it's mentioned to prove a point. Imam Abu Walid al-Baji said. Imam Abu Walid al-Baji, he said this. Imam Abu Walid al-Baji, his understanding of the usuli principle on this is this. Remarkable. And his writing style was such that it made you feel like you knew him. So even though you were miles away, years after his time, and you're sitting looking at his books, or you hear his name come up and he mentions a mas'ala, you feel like he's your uncle. He's some close member of your family. I saw one sheikh once, and he said, I sleep with this book above my bedstand. And when I get up, after I wash my hands, I read a section from it. And before I go to sleep, I read a section from it. I never go a day without looking at Abu Walid al-Baji. And this is a Shafi'i that told me this, not a Maliki. So his knowledge, his rank, it spans all these areas. All these areas. Also, other deaths during this time.